Compliance flagged the footage as internal. Legal screamed to shut it down. But you'd already handed it off to a whistleblower group 2 continents away, under a severed identity linked to a dead hacker named Eros 9. You never knew him, but you'd bought his expired credentials years ago, just in case you ever needed to become someone more dangerous than yourself. Today was that day. Gerald lunged for the screen, pulled cables. The screen flickered off, but the boardroom glass shifted to mirror mode, and every wall became a confession booth. They stared at their reflections, but their reflections stared back. Playbacks of old meetings, spliced with wire transfers, echoed with the screams of children in data files labeled non-viable test candidates. And behind it all, your daughter's voice in a hospital room whispering, "It still hurts." You stood quietly as the chairman asked who authorized the Jakarta expansion. Gerald's mouth opened, then closed, because the timestamp showed it was him, on Christmas Day, 6 years ago, signing in through your stolen credentials. They thought they could hang it on you, thought your signature would become your tombstone, but you'd watermarked your logins back then. Subtle frequency markers embedded into every keystroke, readable only by the program you'd buried in the compliance core. It activated now, overlaying every fraudulent login with a burst of color. Red for them, green for you. And the room turned crimson like a crime scene with no survivors. They began to speak over one another, blaming interns, overseas partners, ghosts. But the footage spoke louder. You turned to leave. The security guard at the elevator didn't move. He recognized you, not from the badge, but from the ghost story whispered by It, the architect who disappeared, but never stopped watching. Thor. Signal came through a final time. Your daughter's vitals. Stable now. The hospital noted a sudden decrease in neural stress, as if the source of her pain had been remotely disconnected. You walked out before the press storm hit. Before the subpoenas, the stock crashes, the televised resignation of a CEO who once called you disposable. But you left behind the truth in every machine, and the silence that followed wasn't yours anymore. You walked through the underground parking deck like the walls remembered you. Your footsteps echoed louder than they should have, but the cameras didn't blink. Not because they weren't watching, but because they were rerunning old footage you'd hand-selected 2 days ago. Every inch of this place had once belonged to you, before they stripped your name from the walls and replaced it with sterile initials that meant nothing. They thought you disappeared into grief. Thought the father of a dying girl would drown in sympathy cards and old recordings of better days. But grief became your camouflage, and while they toasted their IPO in Paris, you rewrote their inheritance line by line. The champagne had flowed over contracts that hid suffering behind clauses too complex for regulators to notice. Children like your daughter were traded in those pages, reduced to data, sold to think tanks. Analyzed by companies who never admitted they existed. Your silence let it grow, long enough for it to rot from the inside. The signal came through again, this time from the Zurich node. It pulsed slow, steady, confirming that the last cache had detonated. Full employee logs, payment schedules, and the offshore trusts built on blood. Every journalist in the network now had what they needed. You surfaced on the plaza just as the crowd started to gather. Cameras flickered. Not the professional kind. These were handheld, cracked screen phones, angry shareholders, wounded, former employees, and activists holding up signs with names too young to read. You knew this moment would come. It had to. They built this company atop whispers, and you had turned them into screams. Inside, chaos unfurled like fire through silk. The new compliance director tried to activate the data kill switch, but you'd converted it to a recursive loop weeks ago. Every deletion duplicated, every purge archived, every trace they thought they erased now existed in triplicate across 5 continents. In conference room C9, the HR head was crying. Her signature was all over the adjusted care trials. She remembered your daughter's face, smiling during her intake exam, hopeful before the pain started. They'd all agreed it was worth the risk. The metrics were promising, the projections intoxicating. But your daughter wasn't a variable. She was the line they crossed when they thought no one was watching. You watched from the mezzanine as Jarrell faced the press. His tie was gone, and the corner of his shirt stuck to his back with sweat. He spoke in corporate riddles, crisis language, and hollow words like integrity, alignment, and due diligence. But the crowd only grew, and the press already had the footage from the private yacht. Jarrell, 2 board members, a federal health official, and a cake shaped like a shredded NDA. They'd toasted to clearing the pipeline while you were holding your daughter's hand through another seizure. They thought offshore meant untouchable. But every wire transfer pinged back to a blind account seeded with bait, fake vendor names, false invoices, and tracking scripts you built during your so-called sabbatical. You didn't rest. You mapped the entire web of deceit. The final domino came from their own mouths. You'd scrubbed nothing. You let their arrogance record itself, like a virus that thinks it's immortal while it mutates into its own execution. Boardroom 7C collapsed when you leaked the uncut strategy brief from 2019. The one titled, Beyond Ethics, Maximizing ROI Through Controlled Trials. No more euphemisms, no more deniability. You'd waited to release it at 11:11 a.m., the exact moment your daughter flatlined in surgery 2 years ago before being revived. She lived, barely. But the pain had never left, because the damage was wired into her nervous system by a serum they hadn't even registered with the FDA. You found the formula hidden in plain sight. It wasn't buried, it was paraded, branded under a philanthropic initiative with her name in the tagline. They had used her story in their marketing. That was your final fuse, not the money, not the betrayal. But seeing her image on a billboard with the word breakthrough, while you watched her scream through another night of tremors. You released everything in 4 waves: medical, legal, financial, and personal. Every thread led back to them, and the media tore through the files like wolves set free. By 1 p.m., trading halted. By 2, the federal regulators entered the building. By 3, the chairman of the board was found in his hotel room, trying to charter a plane to somewhere without extradition. They thought you were bluffing. They underestimated what a father could become when silence failed and justice refused to knock. But you didn't knock. You rewired the locks. The receptionist from earlier finally ran out, pale and breathless. She handed you an envelope. Inside was a letter with no signature, just 1 sentence. We didn't know she was yours, but they did. They always did. That's why they forced your exit, deleted your name, erased your patents from their portfolios. They knew she was yours. They thought you'd stay broken, but you'd become something else. Something quiet, meticulous, patient enough to wait until every camera was pointing in their direction. And now the world was watching. No edits, no press statement strong enough to cover the cracks. They lost what they stole, on a global stage. Everything they built, Every dollar, every relationship burned in the spotlight of their own cruelty. And you, the ghost they buried, had risen with the receipts. Gerald's voice trembled during his final public appearance. Not from guilt, from fear, because the headline read, "Whistleblower Identity Linked to Disgraced Founder. Source Suggests Full Circle Reckoning." The empire collapsed between sips of champagne, each clink of the glass another tombstone. And you didn't need to lift a finger today, the truth did all the work.